We think of the Bible as one big book, when in truth it's really a library of 66 books written by more than 40 authors over a period of 1,500 years. And there are books about history, there are books about music, books about war, books about sex, books about prophecy, books of philosophy, books about theology, lots of theology in the Bible. Some of it is absolutely fascinating, and other parts of the Bible are really quite boring, actually, to read. Some of it is funny, some of it is tragic, and some of it is rated R. So why is the dark side of human behavior so graphically written into the Bible? And it is because the Bible tells us what actually happened. That biblical heroes are not photoshopped to look better than they actually really were. That even godly heroes in the Bible, like David, are presented in their less than godly behavior. And so it is that in our journey through the biblical biography of David, we come to chapters with bloody murders and intrigue and lying and dirty politics. And I need to go on record as saying, I did not write this. I am not responsible for what it says. I am simply the messenger that reports it. But I must admit that there are some parts of the Bible that are difficult, if not embarrassing, to actually read out loud in a family church service. So we pick up the story of David in 2 Samuel chapter 2. The pagan Philistines have resoundingly defeated Israel's army and occupied much of Israel's kingdom. The king is dead. The country is devastated in its infrastructure, and the nation is rapidly rushing toward civil war. In the course of time, according to 2 Samuel 2, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?" he asked. The Lord said, "Go up." David asked, "Where shall I go?" "To Hebron," the Lord answered. So David went up there with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David also took the men who were with him, each with his family, and they settled in Hebron and its towns. Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. When David was told that it was the men of Jabesh-Gilead who had buried Saul, he sent messengers to the men of Jabesh-Gilead to say to them, "The Lord bless you for showing this kindness to Saul your master by burying him. May the Lord now show you kindness and faithfulness, and I too will show you the same favor because you have done this. Now then, be strong and brave, for Saul your master is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them." Judah was one of the 12 tribes, one of the 12 provinces or states of the nation of Israel. And Judah was the home state of David. With the nation in shambles, with much of the territory occupied by the enemy, with the nation of Israel dislocated from its capital, David moved to Hebron, a city in Judah, and there the leaders of his home state rallied around him and anointed him to become the king, not of Israel, but only of their state. So he became the king at last of half a kingdom. Actually, not even half a kingdom. It was 1/12 of a kingdom. Now, it's very interesting when someone ascends to power to watch the first decisions they make and how they behave when they first come to high political office. David immediately acted like a king, and he took a specific situation. In the town of Jabesh-Gilead, there were soldiers who had bravely attacked a pagan Philistine fortress in order to retrieve the mutilated bodies of the former king, Saul, and his 3 sons. At risk of their own lives, they brought the bodies back, treated them with honor, and buried them in their hometown of Jabesh Gilead. And David wanted to honor them. That's his first act as king. It was the right thing to do. But it was also politically shrewd, because Jabesh Gilead was not part of his home state of Judah. He was thereby honoring the previous king, Saul, and he was also wooing those who were outside of his small kingdom to someday become part of it. But the crowning of David as the king of part of Israel triggered a gruesome and long civil war with the other 11 provinces of Israel. With the king, let's call the northern kingdom Israel, the 11 states or provinces, was under the leadership of Saul's general. His name was Abner. He seized control over the country, and he set up a puppet king. His name was King Ishbosheth. Doesn't really have a ring to it. It just doesn't quite actually work. He was the 40-year-old surviving son of King Saul. With the Philistines occupying so much of the country, he had to move the capital, and he did not anticipate, but it quickly happened, that civil war broke out at a place called the Pool of Gibeon. It was a confrontation between the recently defeated army of this northern kingdom and the very small army of the kingdom of Judah that was ruled over by David. The two generals were there from each of those kingdoms, General Abner and General Joab, and they realized that if there was an all-out war, that would devastate the nation. So rather than an all-out war, they came up with an alternative. Abner said to Joab, "Let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand-to-hand in front of us." "All right, let them do it," Joab said. So they stood up and were counted off. 12 men for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 for David. Then each man grabbed his opponent by the head and thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they fell down together. So that place in Gibeon was called Helkath Hazarim. It was the beginning of a civil war not unlike the American Civil War, where brothers fought against brothers and cousins fought against cousins, where families were divided. At the very time when they should have been fighting against the pagan Philistines, it was Jew fighting against Jew. And they somehow thought that rather than everybody fighting, they would have sort of a Goliath-esque type of event where it would be 12 on 12, except it could not be contained. And by the end of the day, General Abner had lost 360 of his soldiers, and General Joab had 19 soldiers who were dead. The battle that day was very fierce, and Abner and the men of Israel were defeated by David's men. So the two armies started heading home, except there was one guy in the army of Judah who wouldn't let it go. He just wouldn't let it go. You know, there are people like that probably in every generation. The fight's been had, the decision has been made, and they just won't quit. They insist on still pushing whatever the fight is. Asahel was the brother of General Joab, and he decided that single-handedly he would go after General Abner. He was especially fast on his feet, and he tried to track him down. He kept catching up to him, and General Abner didn't want the fight. He knew it wasn't a fair fight. He was a veteran soldier. He knew all of the tricks of hand-to-hand combat. He just did not want to fight against this young man after the battle was over, and especially against someone who was the brother of David's general. But Asahel, he just wouldn't let it go. He chased Abner, turning neither to the right or to the left as he pursued him. Abner looked behind him and asked, "Is that you, Asahel?" "It is," he answered. Then Abner said to him, "Turn aside to the right or to the left. Take on one of the young men and strip him of his weapons." But Asahel would not stop chasing him. Again, Abner warned Asahel, "Stop chasing me. Why should I strike you down? How could I look your brother Joab in the face?" But Asahel refused to give up the pursuit. And so Abner thrust the butt of his spear into Asahel's stomach, and the spear came out through his back. He fell there and died on the spot. It didn't have to happen. This was not General Abner's fault. He didn't want the fight. He tried to talk this young man out of it. But Asahel attacked, and Abner defended himself. This seasoned soldier made a quick victim out of the other general's brother. And that then triggered yet another conflict. Because General Joab was then angry over the death of his brother, and he wanted to kill General Abner in retaliation, and a bad situation just became a worse situation. Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was setting, they came to the hill of Ammah near Giah on the way to the wastelands of Gibeon. Then the men of Benjamin rallied around and behind Abner. They formed themselves into a group and took their stand on the top of a hill. Abner called out to Joab, "Must the sword devour forever? Don't you realize that this will end in bitterness? How long before you order your men to stop pursuing their brothers?" Joab answered, "As surely as God lives, if you had not spoken, the men would have continued the pursuit of their brothers until morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men came to a halt. They no longer pursued Israel, nor did they fight anymore. And finally, it was one of those wonderful days when cooler heads prevailed. When in the midst of a fight between people that should have been in the closest of relationships, someone said, "Are we really going to do this? Do we really have to fight to the death? Can't we just stop?" And the cooler heads did prevail. And the fight was stopped, and the slaughter didn't happen. Well, at least not for that day. But the civil war between these competing kings and armies, it wouldn't stop. When they should have been fighting the Philistines, they kept fighting each other. And according to 2 Samuel 3, the war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. So with David's reign then strengthening, he started to act more and more like a king. And that wasn't always a good thing. In the opening lines of 2 Samuel 3, we read the names of 6 sons of David that were born while he was in his temporary capital of Hebron. 6 sons by 6 different women. David now had at least 6 wives. And while we may think that was primarily something about sex, it was also something very much about politics. But either way, this is something that was clearly forbidden by Old Testament law. Old Testament law that David must have known very well because it predated him by half a millennium. If we go back in the Old Testament law in Deuteronomy 17, when you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, "Let us set a king over us like all the nations around us," be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. David knew that. He knew it. And he deliberately chose to defy the law of God. And yes, in the 21st century, we tend to think that that was mostly about sex. But in the list of the names of those that he married, it includes Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, the king of Geshur. Geshur was actually a small kingdom way to the north. It wasn't part of Israel at all. And apparently David was entering into political marriages so that he could shore up his international relations in anticipation of the day when he would rule over the entire country. But it doesn't really make any difference whether it was about sex or about politics. What David did in having multiple wives was absolutely against the law of God. The people of Israel were supposed to be different. That was the whole point. They weren't supposed to be like all their pagan neighbors who didn't believe in God. And David was behaving just like the kings of these pagan nations. But he wasn't the only one who was into power politics. In the northern half of Israel, General Abner was also sinfully misbehaving. During the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Now, Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why did you sleep with my father's concubine?" Well, his father was King Saul, and he also was a polygamist. And after his death, General Abner picked a woman out of King Saul's harem and went to bed with her. And again, it may have been as much or more about politics than it was about sex, because in those days, when someone would seize someone else's kingdom, one of the ways they would demonstrate the power was to take the women out of the harem and to sleep with the former king's wives. When Ishbosheth objected, General Abner flexed his political muscles, and he said, "Well, if you're going to object, I'll tell you what, I'll take your kingdom and I'll just give it away to David." And King Ishbosheth was so threatened by that he backed down out of absolute fear from the challenge that his own general had given to him. But as General Abner was realizing that politically he was on the losing side, David's kingdom was getting stronger and the northern kingdom was getting weaker and weaker. And so he decided to sell out, call it high treason to the crown of Israel. And so he sent a secret message offering a deal. Abner sent messengers on his behalf to say to David, "Whose land is it? Make an agreement with me and I will help you bring all Israel over to you." "Good," said David, "very good. I will make an agreement with you, but I demand one thing of you. Do not come into my presence unless you bring Michal, the daughter of Saul, when you come to see me." Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, demanding, "Give me my wife Michal." So what we have here is more behind-the-scenes politics of these biblical characters who are wheeling and dealing for their own ambition and their own pleasures and their own purposes, rather than being primarily occupied with giving God's leadership to God's people. Abner offers to turn over these 11 provinces to David. And David says, of course he wanted the provinces, but he wanted some extras as well. And he said, "I want you to throw in this woman, Michal, in the deal." And if you remember earlier in the biography of David, Michal was the princess of the kingdom, the daughter of King Saul. King Saul had given her hand in marriage to David, and they were very much in love. But then, when one day Saul became angry with David, he took his daughter back and forced her to marry another man. And now David is saying, "Well, I want her back again." And so she was taken back. And she's turned back over to David while her second husband publicly weeps and groans because of his love for her, and he didn't want to lose her. And maybe this was a lot about politics as well, because it would clearly be to David's advantage if the queen was in fact the daughter of the previous king, and those who were loyal to Saul would then switch loyalty over to him. So it was politics on top of politics on top of politics. What happened? Well, she was seized and returned to David. And no one seems to ever ask these women what they want or much care. So a concubine is bedded involuntarily. A woman is traded back and forth between husbands. All these decisions made by powerful men who are exercising their political muscle in order to accomplish what they want, but never once asking these women what they wanted. General Abner, knowing that he was on the losing side, decided to turn against King Ishbosheth, and he gave away the kingdom, just gave it away. And in his political process, he persuaded other leaders, primarily those from the state of Benjamin, to go along with his decision and strike the deal. Abner also spoke to the Benjamites in person. Then he went to Hebron to tell David everything that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin wanted to do. When Abner, who had 20 men with him, came to David in Hebron, David prepared a feast for him and his men. Then Abner said to David, "Let me go at once and assemble all Israel for my lord the king, so that they may make a compact with you, and that you may rule over all that your heart desires." So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. At last, peace was at hand. But there then came an unexpected twist in revenge politics. General Abner and David, they had struck a deal. They had had a party. Everything was ready to go, and happy days were there again. But then comes General Joab, David's own general, who wasn't included in the decision, who felt left out, who didn't like General Abner because he had killed his brother, even if it had been in self-defense, who could see where all of this was going, that when the kingdoms were combined, it would be General Abner, the seasoned general, who would wear the 5 stars, and he would be demoted in this new united kingdom to 2 or 3 or 4 stars. And so Joab decided to go and confront King David and tell him that this was a really bad decision that he was making. And when that didn't work, he pretended that he was going on a social visit to General Abner. Joab took Abner aside into the gateway as though to speak with him privately. And there, to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach, and he died, which created an immediate political crisis for David. He had just struck a political deal to unify the kingdom, a conversation that 2 men had had, and the other guy had just been killed. So what's going to happen to this treaty? And worse yet, there's going to be a rumor that's going to go around that said that David is behind it. That's what people are going to say. You know, conspiracy theory is not a modern invention. There are people in every generation that can figure out things that are not there. And so to protect himself politically, David decides that he's got to convince everybody that he was not part of this and that he actually grieves over the murder of General Abner. So later, when David heard about this, he said, "I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood fall on the head of Joab and upon his father's house." And then he speaks a curse, which, he was eloquent, but this is getting really mean. "May Joab's house never be without someone who has a running sore or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food." You don't want that kind of curse. Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, "Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in the mourning in front of Abner." King David himself walked behind the bier. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud at Abner's tomb, and all the people wept also. And it worked. All the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people and all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. These are 2 chapters in the biography of one of the Bible's most famous of characters and most adulated of characters. You know, when I hear people say, we live at a time when politics and animosity between political groups is just terrible, I want to say to them, you don't want to go back to the Bible. At least it's better than it was back then. We live in actually easier and better times than in these worst of politics in these ancient times. In all this, remember that God had promised that there would be a united kingdom, and God had promised that David would be the king over this united kingdom of Israel. And remember that God accomplishes his purposes in spite of, sometimes through, war and rape and politics and murder and other atrocities. That God sets himself on his purposes and he relentlessly goes after them to accomplish them in spite of our sinful behavior. But it does raise questions for us. Could God have accomplished his purposes without their sinful behavior? Was it necessary for them to do these things in order to get to where God wanted them to be? Does sin justify? Is it justified by the goal that we seek? And because it's a good and lofty goal, that somehow excuses us behaving in ways that are contrary to what God wants? I mean, I hope you know the answers to these questions. That God does not need our misbehavior, our sins, our crimes, our animosity, our hatred, our injustice in order to accomplish his purposes. So never think that we need to sin in order to make God's good happen. Not in politics, not in business, not in personal relationships. The truth is that when we live by God's standards, when we do that which is good and kind and loving and just, we are declaring our faith in God, that we can live God's way and God will accomplish his purposes. And so what we must do as followers of Jesus Christ is to trust God even when we are tempted to manipulate the circumstances and behave like the pagans. That we need to do what is right and just. Do not sin, no matter what. And that in itself is a declaration of trust and confidence in God that he will accomplish his purposes in our world, in our nation, in our businesses, in our families, in our relationships, that this good God is more powerful than any circumstance, and we need to seek to live God's way. Father, help us to do this because the temptations are constant to misbehave. Lord, may we not be like those who unrighteously defied you, seemingly to accomplish your purposes in these ancient stories. But may we follow the example of Jesus, fully trusting and fully confident in you, to live righteously, to do justly, to be loving, and to believe and trust in you to accomplish your good. In Jesus' name.